Welcome to the Hyborian Keep. I'm Old Man Hyborian. Here we review tales of Robert E. Howard's greatest character, Conan the Barbarian. Today we're going to review a novel of short stories called The Three Blades Against the Darkness by Stephen Gasper. This won't be some fluffy review, it'll be an old man's honest opinion. And just as a heads up, there will be spoilers. So I don't want you to go crying to your mommy if I say something that spoils it for you. If you don't want the spoilers, go to the summary at the end. And if you enjoy the video, please like and subscribe. And with that, let's get after it. This is a book of short stories of Conan, Solomon Kane, and Kull. It was done by Stephen Gasper. It's 182 pages long and has a couple of stories of each characters in the book. The author goes on to talk that he's always been a fan of Conan. He had a lot of the paperbacks back in the 80s and the comics as well. But in the early 2000s, he sold all of his Conan content. Probably got married and his wife made him sell it. But regardless, a few years ago, his interest sparked up again. So he wrote this book of short stories. So the first story is a Conan story. It's called The Scroll of Akon. So it's Conan, he's young, shortly after the Tower of the Elephant. And Conan's in this tavern. And there's these three guys in there talking about the recent robbery at the tower. So Conan speaks up and says, you know, he was the one that robbed it. And if they wanted to hear his tale, that all they had to do was buy him a drink. So one of the guys, they end up throwing a drink in his face. That started a brawl. The innkeeper ends up knocking Conan out and dragging him outside. And when Conan wakes up, he's in this fancy aristocrat's home. A guy named Nicholas, who had heard rumors that Conan had robbed the tower, and he wanted to hire Conan to do a robbery for him. He wanted Conan to steal this ancient scroll from a rival of his. So Conan, he does the heist. During the heist, there's some climbing involved, and Conan uses rubber suction cups for climbing. Yeah, rubber suction cups in the Hyborian Age. It was that point there I said, oh no, what did I just buy? But I soldiered through, and Conan gets the scroll, takes it back to Nicholas, who ends up drugging him because he wants to use Conan's body as a human host for the demon Kuthas. But with the help of Nicholas' servant Dobo, Conan escapes, and he ends up burning the estate to the ground, and Nicholas and Dobo was inside. So that was the first one, Conan tale. The second one was a Solomon Kane. It was called Moon Over the Black Forest. So it takes place in the Black Forest of Germany. Solomon has heard rumors that there's a werewolf on the prowl, so he goes in search of it. While he's wandering through the forest, he comes upon this hut. He requests to have some shelter, and the woman lets him inside. It's a woman with her two kids. And Solomon asks where the husband is, and she kind of goes on telling a story about this creature, and that she thinks that the husband was killed by the creature, and that there's a nearby castle, that the rumor is that the count is the monster. So Solomon, the next day, he goes to the castle. He dines with the count, Graf Strasher, and his sister Margaret, and he plans on spending the night. So he kind of takes a liking to the sister. So just before turning into bed, the sister warns him that he's in danger and that he should leave right away. So he wants her to leave with him, but she won't. So Solomon leaves. While he's in the forest, he gets attacked by the werewolf. The werewolf is kind of getting the best of him, and all of a sudden a crossbow bolt goes through the werewolf and kills it. So who the werewolf ended up being, it was a kind of a predictable story, mildly entertaining. I'm not familiar with Solomon Kane, so I'm not sure if the references were true to the character or not, but I didn't really mind the story. The third story was Kull, and it's called Daggers at My Back. So not long after Kull's started his reign as king, he's trying to convince his council to go to war with Chameleon. And he finally convinces them to do so, and as he has his army all gathered up and marching, several of his loyal barons turn traitor, and Kull's army is attacked by multiple different empires that have an aid of a wizard. So the king of one of these empires was King Trachis, and he had a magical sword, and he was confident he could beat Kull, so they had a battle, and Kull ends up winning. So this wizard that the enemy had working for them, he had the eye of the serpent in his possession, and the wizard ends up being a serpent man. So Brule, he ends up with the aid of a special spear that was given to him by a rival wizard. He shows up and uses this spear to kill the serpent man. The next short story was a Conan story. It was called Rendezvous with Death. So Conan, he's in a mercenary group, and they're in the middle of a big battle. And within the group is an Aesir named Nygard, who's also a great warrior. So at the end of the battle, it's just Nygard and Conan left. They killed all the enemy. Basically, they stood back to back and just slaughtered the whole works of them, and they were the last two standing. So anyway, Conan kind of gets a bromance on for this guy and is trying to convince him that maybe they should travel the world together and make a good pair. So Nygard, he recalls an event that happened to him several years ago where he was wounded in battle, and he was laying wounded on the battlefield. He was visited by Lady of Death, who told him that this was not his time and that they would meet again in Luxor. So Nygard decides to leave without Conan to go to Luxor to meet his death. And Conan can't understand why he's going to face his death. So it was kind of a weird little story, didn't much care for it. The next short story was a Solomon Kane called The Long Journey Home. So it starts off with Solomon on a ship, and he reflects back to saving this girl, Marilyn Tafferel. And he's been on this search for this girl for 5 years. And it all started when he arrived in France. He met an old comrade, and they went to a tavern, and while he was at the tavern, one of the patrons was speaking ill of a sailor that Solomon knew, so he took offense to that. So it ended up, they got into a duel, and Solomon stabbed him, and a few days later he was dying. So Solomon went to see him, and this guy, he made a confession that this girl, this Marilyn Tafferel, he was jealous of her and thought that she was going to take all the family fortune, so he sold her to slavers, and he wanted Solomon to go track her down and bring her back so he could die with a clean conscience. So Solomon takes off, tracks the girl down in Africa, and after killing a vampire queen, the girl and him, they start traveling through the jungle. They get sick, and a tribe takes him in. They find out that he was the one that killed the vampire queen, so they celebrated him and nursed him back to health. So then they took off again to try to get to the coast to get home. And during that travel, they met a dangerous tribe, and they had to battle them, and then they had to battle a giant snake before they finally reached the coast. At the coast, Solomon met an old acquaintance, and the guy gives him a ride on a ship to the voyage to England. But on their way to England, the ship was attacked by a Spanish ship, and Marilyn almost drowned. So eventually they did reach England. Solomon delivers the girl to her family. Then he decides to travel to his hometown, where he discovers that a girl that he once fancied, one Elizabeth Stewart, had taken her own life after she was abducted. So Solomon sets off to kill the man who abducted her. This man and his gang apparently took over this town, so Solomon tracks them down, kills several of them, including the leader. So that story was kind of rambling, it was kind of odd. Didn't care for it at all. It just seemed to be all over the place, jumping from here to there. So wasn't too impressed with that one. The next one was a Kull story. It was titled What Yesterday May Bring. And it was kind of an odd tale where Kull, he wakes up on the battlefield. He doesn't know who he is, and he wanders around. He wanders into this nearby farm who had this farmer and his daughter. And he takes a shine to the daughter. He helps out around the farm. He does honey. He does, normal labor work. And he's enjoying how life is so simple. And he's been doing this for several months until Brule finally shows up, tells him who he is. So Kull, he kind of snaps out of it and says, yeah, it's time to leave. And then all of a sudden, Kull wakes up. So the whole thing was a dream. But it was so real that he wanted to go in search of this cabin. So he goes and he finds the cabin. And there's this old hag there. And the old hag mentions Elizabeth, who was the farmer's daughter, and that how she's waiting for him on the other side. So this kind of, messes with Kull's mind. So he ends up riding away. And when he looks back, instead of seeing the old hag, he sees Elizabeth standing there waving at him. So the whole story was just kind of odd. I didn't care for it at all. So the last story was a Conan story, and it was called Uneasy Lies the Head. So shortly after the Queen dies, King Conan, he starts having all these dreams. He's dreaming about past battles and things like that. Makes him very unsettled, and this assassin shows up and tries to kill him. Well, during the fight, the assassin had mentioned the word Zarum. So Conan does some research, finds out that Zarum didn't appear to be a person, appeared to be an island in the Western Sea off the coast of Stygia. And it was called Zarum bin Sudha. And it allegedly had an ancient civilization. So Conan ends up sneaking out of the castle, going to this island. On his way, he does this random act. He helps a farmer pull out a stump. As he's going on his way, he gets attacked by bandits. Then he meets up with this witch. The witch says that she knew he was coming. There's a mention of the Scarlet Citadel, and the witch tells Conan that he was drugged, and that's why he was having all these funky dreams. And the witch also says that he's headed for his doom. And the author threw in a reference from one of his past stories, Rendezvous with Death. So Conan, he slugs away. He's determined to get to this island. So he reaches the coast, and he ends up speaking with this man who's 109 years old. So apparently the day that this old man was born was the day that a meteorite had crashed into the island and destroyed the city. So when the man was younger, he went to the island and he took a piece of the meteorite and he brought it back and he carved it into a knife. So he knew that Conan was heading to the island, so he gave Conan the knife. Then the old man dies. So Conan goes to the island, he sees where the meteorite had hit, and then this big earthquake happens, and this giant snake shows up. So Conan battles the snake. The snake swallows him whole, but it ended up only being an illusion. So when Conan comes to, there's this wizard, Zarum, standing there. And he tells Conan that they've met before, that he knew him, but Conan had no idea what he was. So the wizard cast some kind of a spell on him. Conan was reliving multiple deaths where he died in agony. And then the wizard probed his brain, and there was some reference to Belit. So Conan ends up finally recognizing the guy. He's the master of Yimsha from the people of the Black Circle. So Conan ends up stabbing this wizard with the meteorite blade. And then the island breaks apart. Conan rushes to his boat, gets on his boat. And once he's on the boat, he determines that there's more to life than being a king. So he takes off on an adventure. Not the best of stories. Like throwing in a bunch of names from past Conan stories just doesn't make it a Conan story. So, when an author does that, that just makes the whole thing seem phony to me. There is illustrations in the book. He says that he couldn't get somebody to illustrate them for him. So he used some sort of a program for the illustrations, which is obvious. So the illustrations really didn't add anything to the book. I don't know what you could have done to really add anything to the book. So that's the book of short stories, Three Blades Against Darkness, featuring Conan, Solomon Kane, and Kull. Well, there you have it. A novel of short stories featuring Conan, Kull, and Solomon Kane by Stephen Gaspar. With fan writing, it's usually less than stellar, and this is no exception. Did not really enjoy this. The stories, some of them were mediocre at best. I would not recommend you buying this. I would not recommend you reading it, because I'm pretty sure that you wouldn't enjoy it. So with that, I bid you farewell.